crossed my mind is I thought, well, in order to, there's something I should tell you guys about your students, and I think it'll help you interact with them. I think it will help you sort of understand where they're coming from, and well, here's where they're coming from. If you want to get a picture of the numbers, you could do a Google search, for example, migration to the cities in China, or China urban migration, and glance around, and you'll quickly discover that it is, or it has been over the last 30 years, the single largest movement of people, not just in the history of the 20th century and the early 21st century, but in the history of the world, okay? And you're thinking, well, that's, no, really, literally hundreds of millions. They have gone from their countryside homes, and when I say homes, they're no longer living in mud huts as such. In the National Geographic Channel, you can see there's some houses there. In the National Geographic Channel are these shows, remember Wild Kingdom, Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. Well, that was 1970s, 1980s, and I'm probably older than at least 50% of the people watching these, or more than 50% of the people watching these videos. You'd see these people living in societies where there'd be, a mud hut, essentially. Well, they're not living in mud huts anymore, but it's just about like that. And so if it's not one generation back, it's this present generation. I mean, the person that perhaps 20% or 30% of your class students will have come directly from the sort of, not quite mud hut, but you can see these stone buildings, etc. They come from the countryside. They come from very, very, everything's far more modest backgrounds than you guys will have come from. And I really just mean, economic and educational background, and sort of our cultural inheritance. We've got a democracy, but at any rate, you need to understand that they're all moving to the cities, right? Including Shanghai and Beijing, but Shenzhen's even more so. Shanghai's about 60 or 70% outsiders. Beijing's still about 50%. Okay, Beijing's still kind of it's still kind of like that. And that's part of why Shenzhen's so much more open towards foreigners. But you need to be very careful that you don't. I'll give you an example. They're coming to this. Imagine they're coming to the city. They're thinking, they already believe wholeheartedly that it's a better way of life. They can earn a better salary. They can, have really, they've got really good working electricity. They can buy some appliances. They can go to a neat mall. All these things are just the future. And I imagine that some of them actually almost feel somewhat ashamed of where they come from, to some extent. Well, maybe not ashamed, but they really look up to you. They admire you as the foreigner from America, or from Canada, or from Great Britain. And Hollywood, they've had TV. All of them have had TV from the time they were young until now. And so Hollywood has done its job well in terms of completely and totally convincing them, making them absolutely certain that you are a representative of modern, wealthy societies, whatever that means, okay? And so they will products, to them, that's terrific. That's wow. And if they can make 5,000 renminbi or 4 or 5,000, even 6,000 renminbi, and that's roughly, 8 or 900 or 1,000 US dollars a month. Wow, that's so terrific. That's like they've just become a corporate lawyer or something. They're training, And so if it's a really big deal to them to come into these classes. Not all of them understand. This is now. I'm going to go on a sidetrack here briefly. I'm going to go on a sidetrack, and I think I may have discussed it briefly in some of the other videos, but you will discover that there are really very different types of students. They fall into very different groups, very different classes. One, you're going to have, it depends on the location of your school. Okay, and I've got to backtrack once again. I'm thinking of people who are teaching adults, people who are teaching at Webb International English, teaching at Met, teaching at Wall Street, teaching at EF. You're at these private adult training centers, okay? Private adult training centers. This doesn't apply to those of you who are going to be teaching kids. I mean, some of it does. This is useful knowledge, just in terms of getting an idea of the social geography in which you're going to be working. Yes, it's useful to that extent, but there isn't as much direct applicability to your students, right? And what they're thinking. But so if this video is not relevant, skip to the next one. But I think it will be. I think it will be. Or has been. All right. So, there are two groups. There are going to be some of those who are in your class whose parents were already well educated and were already in the cities, or perhaps they were in a so-called second-tier city, not one of these big-tier cities, but they were already, the local teachers or the local government officials, etc. Okay, and so they have gone to a university, probably a good university, not just a vocational training institute. There's lots of vocational training institutes in China, and they've already got their good job, and that they need to work on their oral English. Okay, and those people will be totally very, very different, and will have a different view of those other group of your students who maybe their idea is they want to work for a factory and sell their products overseas, and they're going to know about these particular products, and they're going to be able to speak English, right? And they're going to be on, communicating by email and sometimes by phone with buyers all over the world, but quite a few of them there will be in first world countries, right? Yeah, it's 35% of China's exports go to 20% go to the United States, 22% go to the United States. That's a huge chunk. And then you've got England, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, Ireland, and you've got other countries where they're still speaking English to them, like Germany, France, so their idea is, okay, they've got this skill, they can speak English, and they're going to sell products, or they're going to be the contact, the liaison, when people come to the factory. And I've met those people. I've been to the factories when they're there, and I'd say about 50% of them are doing a great job. They've got their English speakers, and then 50% of them are doing horrible. They need more fully competent English speakers in those roles, dealing with freight forwarding, describing products, liaising with the foreign buyers, everything, right? Because I've gone to places where a 19-year-old kid with no training, no education, is just so useless. I've just said, look, don't even try to speak English. It's just really. So this is a big deal to them. All right, going back to my original point, and I'm sorry if I'm going off on tangents. I didn't get great sleep last night. Just had a cup of coffee. Hopefully I can put this together for you. But at any rate, they think it's their they're you know, to them, what they think is, you might think that what their dreams are just kind of lame, or they're not. I mean, it's nothing really to be proud of, but for them it's really something to be proud of. So you need to remember that, okay? And so be very careful, and you will discover right away that they like you so much before they walk in the door. It's kind of it's a little bit unbalanced, right? It's a little bit unbalanced. And on the other hand, there'll be some of them who will tell you, well, I only want to learn English to help me in my job. I've even had one say, I don't really want to learn English. And then some of them just really don't like foreigners. I mean, some of the men, I don't know why that is. Well, maybe I do know why. They don't like men coming in around their women or something. I don't know. But either way, most Chinese men don't really care. They don't know anything about foreigners too much. They don't, and there are very few foreigners still in China. Okay, I mean, so and let's see here. Now, what is the downside to that? The topic of this video is, where are your students coming from? Where are your students coming from? And part of me tends to think, well, no, I'm not. That's okay. So, what is the downside? What is the downside to the fact that many of your students, a large proportion of them, will be they'll be very new to, I guess you could say, urban life, or a somewhat more modern life. It's not modern it's not good if you don't have voting, right? You can't ever be fully modern without voting. Okay, so all right, but nonetheless, they're not out running, chasing after pigs and chickens, etc. Right? So what's the downside to that? The downside is, one, they've been told by their government in hundreds of different ways that their government and them as a people, and they as a people, okay, they use the word minzu, which is roughly translated as like ethnicity. It's almost borderline saying race, okay? That your government and you as a people are one and the same, okay? And so if you criticize their government, they will take it personally, and they will turn on you, okay? They are very exceedingly fragile-hearted. Okay, I'll say brittle. Their self-image is extremely brittle along these lines, and if you do something that sounds like you're criticizing quote-unquote China, which their government has convinced them is almost the same as their government. Okay, Chineseness and their government, they don't fully distinguish it completely. I mean, you would be surprised. Now, here, a few caveats. These are generalizations, and I probably don't need to tell most of you that, but I mean, you haven't been to China. I would say the percentages, even those who are excuse my French, even those who are educated, I mean, they've got a master's degree in software engineering, many of those even, you will see traces of this thinking, of this assumption that Chinese government is a reflection of Chinese culture, and that our way, that it is somehow unique to Chineseness, and that criticizing the government is like criticizing them. It's a brilliant, I guess you could say, psychological trick that they've done, and you will discover that. And me making that statement is really pretty racist. In a political, well, I don't even want to say more than that, but I think you need to know it, because I don't have anything scripted. This is completely impromptu, right? I guess you could almost ad-libbing, right? I don't even have any notes where I say I'm going to hit on this point, no, nothing like that. So what is the downside if you break this brittle heart that they have, brittle self-image? I saw another video where they called it a glass heart or something, and that's a good way to put it. And I would say that I would say that you need to be careful, because they will turn on you as a group in their class. In the class, they might voice objections right there to you, but more likely what they'll do is they'll complain to management. And I'll give you an example. Recently, I made a few insinuations here and there to 3 Chinese students that were in my class that voting is a good thing. That's sort of, and I perhaps made a sarcastic comment or two about certain public rituals that you'll find in China, and they reported me. They gave me really bad reviews. Okay, like they downgraded me, gave me really bad reviews, and they reported me. And in their report, they included the fact that I was talking about subjects I shouldn't be talking about, and they also just came out and said politics. And then they repeated certain slogans that they'd heard before regarding the need to be harmonious. You know, there's lots of words and slogans that you end up seeing here and there over and over, many of them, right? Not just like socialism with Chinese characteristics, but there are many, many of them. And so I saw those phrases. It's happened to a number of times. So you've got to understand that they will turn on you. Otherwise, these people you might think are just so kind and nice and merry, and they really look up to you, and what an amazing, but they won't understand it. They won't understand it. So this brings me over to another point. I know Taiwanese. I knew a Taiwanese man who was a manager. He was a manager of an English school. I won't say which one, whether it's Wall Street. I won't say whether it's Metten. I won't say whether it's Webb. I won't say whether it's EF. But he was a manager of one of these English centers, right? Where you've got 7 foreign teachers. It's the kind of place you guys are going to be applying to. And he was, he's a U.S. citizen. But he's from Taiwan, right? He's Chinese. He grew up in Taiwan. He's kind of doing a stint in China, and his wife is Chinese. And he told me, my child's about to hit 5 years old, and so we've got to get back to the United States, because there is no way, he told me. We're out back, we weren't around anyone else, behind closed doors, and he was like, there is no way I'm going to let my child be raised and put through the educational system here. Okay? I just cannot have that. What the educational system here will do to his mind. He may end up getting good at math. Actually, they do have good math scores. And I'm not referring to a stereotype that Asians are good at math or that Chinese in America score good at math. I mean that they're, relatively speaking, they focus a lot of energy on making sure that they get good math skills. No, just in every other aspect of their education, okay? Including their use of language, okay? I don't really believe when you're continually, I was going to say that if you're continually filtering what you're saying by a wacky, contradictory set of political rules, if you're continually guarding your speech or filtering your speech because of some crazy, wacky, self-contradicting dogma, and believe me, if you really I don't think it really does your language skills a disservice, right? Okay. Now, anything can become a dogma, right? Including there's certain, even the Bible, when the authority to interpret scriptures was left solely to the druthers slowly within the discretion of the medieval Catholic Church. Now, nothing against the Catholic Church, but I'm just saying that, and some of my ancestors are Catholic. I'm not, and most of my ancestors are not Catholic, but a fourth of them are. So I just want to make very clear that absolutely, in no way am I putting down the Catholic Church right now. Okay, but if you read your history books, you'll know that, right? And that was sort of what the Protestant Reformation was about. Right? For example, you may be aware that, they used to burn people at the stake for translating the Bible into English. Burn people at stake for translating the Bible into German, for translating it into French, right? Okay, and the Catholic Church was just absolutely nutty. Deuteronomy says that, hey, we've got to make sure that everybody knows these scriptures intimately, okay? We want to make sure of that. Catholic Church is no, only a certain select group of people, a minuscule proportion of the population, will even have the right to look at the Bible, let alone translate it into local languages so that everyone can get to know this, right? That's what the Protestant Church is about. So I'm not saying anything against Catholic. I'm just saying that, look, all right, I don't want to sound like a hypocrite, because some of you may not be Christians, and, the Bible's not a big deal to you, or at least you think it's not a big deal. You think it hasn't had a substantial impact on your life. I don't know. Okay, hopefully you won't subscribe to the idea that it's not an important text in Western history, right? That would be kind of nutty. But at any rate, I don't want to sound like a hypocrite, because I know there are some institutions that have got their hands on Scripture and absolutely turned it into a self-contradicting dogma. Okay, when in fact Scripture is not contradictory. Sometimes it does speak in sort of parallel verses or parallel languages. There is some dual messaging there, okay, like a paradox, right? There's a parallel meaning. That's a parable, right? Everyone remember when a group of people in Jerusalem gathered around Jesus and said, hey, why do you keep talking to us in parables? Could you stop that? Stop speaking to us in parables. And he said, no, I'm not going to stop doing that. I'm going to continue speaking to you in parables. And, so what's the reason for that? Well, the reason is because sometimes it's useful. You need to send a message to one group of people in one way and another group of people in another way, because they're not capable of understanding the underlying message, okay? And you know that they're not going to understand, okay? So, at any rate, going all the way back to my Thailand, going all the way back, rewinding all the way back, getting out of these footnotes, okay, the footnote within the footnote within the footnote, rewinding all the way back to my acquaintance, not quite a friend, but at least an acquaintance, comrade in arms, right, who said, I've got to get my child out of here because I don't want him being raised in this educational system, okay, because it is, I believe it's brutalizing. I have thought at times that, really it takes, it outside of math, in every other respect that we might have someone become educated to become a real fully functioning citizen, it doesn't build something up. It digs downward and creates a hole to get them out of. It would have been better. It's like it gives them minus knowledge. They become, in certain respects, they become awful students. They refuse to think for themselves. They refuse to take the initiative. They don't want to make mistakes in front of other people, and so they become very, very difficult students. And the reason that is because of where they're coming from. So you also need to be aware of that. Your students are not going to be quote unquote good students, as we normally understand a good student: open-mindedness, some respectfulness towards the teacher, some attention and towards what's going on in the classroom, but not blind, sheepish subservience. Okay, I mean, really, the Chinese educational system, it is truly, if education, kind of builds a foundation, then it builds the first floor and the second floor, and you end up with a good, strong framework for putting things in the area of liberal arts and social studies, outside of the pure math, outside of the pure natural science disciplines. Chinese education ends up creating a huge fucking crater. Okay, it creates a huge crater. Within Chinese students, from the time they're very young, even through college, historically have been required to carry with them a sort of a booklet, right? It's like a little, not quite a passport, but it's an ID, a type of identification. And one of the things it says in there is that you will bear out the truth. You will prove the truth of historical materialism. Okay, now that's a term for and other things, including supporting the party, etc. So essentially, they've in terms of they generally, well, I'll give you a simple example. Chinese parents and Chinese students themselves regularly report terrible difficulties in social studies related classes when they get to the US, because they don't know how to, or they exhibit an extreme unwillingness to analyze and question. For example, it could be like a rule relating to any kind of social rule. It could be, for example, you may remember prohibition, right, from the early 1920s to the early 1930s, 1920 to 1932 or 1933. It's about 12 or 13 years. And you say, well, weigh the pros and cons of prohibition. Was that a good law and policy for the United States to follow? Now write a 3-page essay on it. The kind of dork-minded, monstrous, donkey-ignorant answers they put forward. I mean, it's almost like, automatic F type of thing, right? And so this is part of the, and so I read in journals, newspapers, etc. I've read articles about how the Chinese students and their parents will have indicated that, wow, this is a huge gap we have when we get over to the United States and we end up going to a 4-year college and we're taking a history class or we're taking a literature class. Just this donkey-minded thought process. I mean, they end up being horrible, horrible citizens, and that keeps the party in power, right? So now, another observation. The South is a little better. The South has a little less of that. Okay? Further away from the center, further away from Beijing, you will discover that there's less of that. there's slightly more open-minded discussion of these things, and they push the envelope just a little bit. Okay, that is right in the South, and indeed the most liberal, cutting edge, if you can call any magazine, the most liberal, cutting edge magazine, I in Chinese and in China. I used to buy it more than I do now. I've still got a recent copy. I haven't looked at it recently, but is out of the Shenzhen, Guangzhou area, out of the Guangdong area. It's not tied specifically to the South, but it's called Nanfang Chuang, but it's called like the window of the South, the southern window, and so that's another kind of reason you might be interested in the south of China more than the north. Okay, more than the north. Also, well, let's see. Now let me just finish off a bit. There are many teachers. I'm coming back to the original theme or question, point of this video, and that is, well, what kind of challenges are you going to be presented with by people who are coming from the countryside, who really look up to you, almost idolize you, but have such crazy, ignorant ways of thinking, and they're not all their fault. How are you going to deal with that as a teacher when you're not going to be able to give them an education that you might want to give them? You may want to really do a good job and inspire them and interact with them such that they are able to question and think and analyze and discuss things in a respectful way with each other, but they're not quite able to do that, and they'll even attack you and bonk you over the head if you use your position as a foreigner to address or question those aspects or those assumptions in their society that need to be questioned. In a way, you're almost standing up for them, and you get conked over the head by the very people you're trying to help. So how do you deal with that? So just remember that, I'll give you an example. In my class, and there's a school, I remember there was a part-time teacher at Webb International English when I was there, and he was a real nice guy, but it turned out, and he was a good teacher too, and we found out like one time he got in a little trouble because this girl started crying in a class, and somehow I imagine that he was getting real humorous and joking, and he hurt her feelings. I had a class one time where a girl started crying just a little bit, but then she held it back, and I was glad she didn't just openly start bawling. I've heard of other people who have had girls actually just start crying in class because they get offended or they feel rejected. Sometimes other students are being mean to them. You'll find sometimes that the educated students, the ones who are kind of come from money or whatever, or they kind of will really look down on the students who don't come from that, and will gang up and be real cruel to them. But at any rate, they're foreign. They may end up start crying. So you've got to be careful, and you can get in trouble for that. And you won't really get in trouble, but there's just bear that in mind. Okay.